Good afternoon, everyone. Thank you for joining us today. My name is Felicia Passano, and I'm with the New York State Tug Hill Commission. On behalf of Michael Martin from New York State Archives and the Tug Hill Commission, we welcome you to 400 plus pages of changes, updates, and ensuring you can throw things away legally. An overview of the new government retention schedule. Just going to go over a couple housekeeping tips. You're all muted to reduce background noise, but if you have questions during the webinar, please feel free to put them in the chat box and we will answer them at the end of the presentation. The webinar is being recorded and will be posted to our website when we're through. And finally, we will have a few interactive poll questions throughout the webinar to get a better sense of our audience. And without further ado, I will turn it over to Michael, who will introduce himself.
Okay, thank you, Felicia. Yes, my name is Michael Martin. I have a slide ready to go. Hold on one second here, because people often ask me different questions. So, whoop, technology is new to me. Okay, so this is a little introduction to me. I work for the New York State Archives. I am the Regional Advisory Officer for the Central New York region. So what exactly is the Central New York region? When we're talking about the Central New York region, I usually use the highways as a best way to explain it. And Central New York region, according to the state, is 81, if you're using 81, all the way up to Watertown and past, and all the way down to Binghamton, and going east-west on the thruway, going to about the Waterloo outlets to Herkimer. So everything in that is my region, which would obviously include Jefferson, Lewis, and Oneida County. So I would be your regional advisory officer. And what I'm here for is to answer questions on records management. As you can see, I've been in a bunch of organizations. So I was the past president of the Capital Area Archivists of New York. I have been a board member of the New York Archives Conference, as well as an editor and co-editor of the Mid-Atlantic Regional Archives Conference newsletter for about 12 years. I recently stepped down from that. I've worked in archives for 20 years now. I'm kind of amazed when I wrote that down, but it is true. I actually started out in Madison County at their Historical Society, was one of my first positions back in 2001. And from there, I went to the Onondaga Historical Association and worked there for a number of years in Syracuse. And then to the New York State Archives, where I've been for the last 16 years now. I am working from home, like many people. I'm working from home, which means that sometimes I have Wi-Fi problems, so I apologize in advance. It also means that I'm working at my kitchen table, and despite me wearing headphones, I probably know more about Minecraft than any nearly 50-year-old should. But it is true. That's what working from home means for me. But most of all, really, I'm here to answer your records management questions. So as we go through, we'll talk about the schedule and the changes that are dealing with the LGS-1. Of course, we'll talk about, your specific questions at the end. But if you ever have any kind of questions related to records management, I'm the one you can contact. All right, so let's give this a try. And we'll start our presentation here. Okay, so that's the title I came up with, because apparently I do not like brevity and I wanted to include as much information as possible. All right, so today what we're really going to be doing is we're going to talk about this schedule. It's a 400 plus page kind of monstrosity that's known as the LGS-1. And before I start, I did want to ask, what exactly, where exactly do people work? What's your local government type? So here's the first of our polls here. Do you work in a town, village, or city, county, school districts, or other? And when I say other, are we talking about, your fire districts, your library systems, that sort of thing? And that's really, a good way for me to start to get an idea of the people that we're talking to. Okay. Looks like a lot of municipalities, town, village, or cities, pretty much what I would expect. Don't have anybody from school districts. We are going to cover some things that used to be part of the ED1 for school districts and BOCES. But I'm going to make sure to cover everything. So don't worry about that. Okay, thank you very much. So now, because probably everybody can see that too, we're going to move on to the next part here. Technology is good to me. All right. Okay, so this is what we're going to be using kind of as a guide for our discussion today. I'm going to talk about, the retention schedule itself, what exactly a retention schedule is for anybody who, may be unfamiliar. Talk about how to navigate within the retention schedule, kind of discuss how to find information within the schedule itself. It doesn't matter whether you're using an index, a database, a keyword search. And I'm going to include a quick demo of the online version because I think that's probably the easiest one to use if you're familiar with it. And, we think it's pretty cool. I'm also going to do a brief discussion on office retention schedules and how they can be helpful. And of course, I'm going to explain exactly what the LGS-1 is, and what, of course, happened to all those old schedules. And then the major focus is going to be all the changes and updates that have taken place as part of the consolidation into the LGS-1, the new schedule. So talk about specific updates and changes that are going to affect you. Because what you have to realize is we consolidated about 16 pages of changes and we just focused on those highlights. And if you're interested, all the changes are listed at a link, which I believe is being added to the chat or should be soon. And that lists all the changes as part of the LGS-1. And then finally, I'm going to have a few quick thoughts about just kind of retention in general, some things that have come up from time to time that people have asked. So wanted to make sure to include that as well. Okay. So what exactly is this retention schedule? Well, here's the thing. The State Archives develops this retention schedule because really we have a whole team of people in Albany, and that's our scheduling and retention unit. And their job entirely is to focus on the retention schedules. They know all the laws that relate to the records and the changes that affect them. So really, they're the experts. They're the experts that we refer to as regional advisory officers. They're the experts that we say, okay, we have no idea what these people are talking about in terms of what kind of records, can't identify them. We go to the experts in Albany to give us the answers. And those are the ones that we ask. And what they do is they're continually examining things like statutes, regulations, law, policy, audit requirements, any kind of need for legal evidence, administrative needs, secondary use for like research. They're going over that at all times, looking at it in terms of the retention. So we have this team in Albany, and after they look at all of these, the archives compiles a list of retentions. So remember, when we're talking about retention, the retention schedule will provide you the legally minimum time period you need to keep these records. So how long do you need to keep these records legally? What is the minimum time period? That's what the retention schedule is going to provide you. So some cases it's 3 years, many cases for financial records, it's 6 years, and so on. Something like payroll, we know are long-term, that's 55 years, some are permanent as well. And the retention schedule will let you know. So the retention schedule is giving you the minimum time period, but you can keep things longer. We'll talk about that a little bit later on. The LGS schedule, for example, it was approved by the Board of Regents in July, became official in August, and there's a lot of things that the schedule covers. However, there are some exceptions because, of course, this is New York State. So there are some exceptions to things that the LGS-1 retention schedule does not cover. It doesn't cover your court records. Those are covered by the Office of Courts Administration. It doesn't cover records from Board of Elections. And there are some records that you simply cannot get rid of according to the schedule. It's just not allowed. This includes any records created before 1910. Those need to be kept until we get a chance to look at them and sign off on them. And that's because if you know your New York State history, the 1911 Capitol fire, that's why the reason the year 1910 was chosen. 1911, the New York State Capitol, which held all the archives and the library and all the really old papers that we have, that had a fire, and much of our information, particularly from the British colonial period, was lost, including some early revolutionary stuff. So before we get rid of anything from that time period, we want to make sure we don't have it as well, just to make sure, you know, you're not covering something that maybe we need. And you also, of course, cannot get rid of records if you have a current legal proceeding or a FOIL request or an audit. Obviously, you can't get rid of your records then as well. The same is true if a record is not scheduled or it's shown to have a unique historical value after an appraisal. And if you have any questions about the appraisal records, you can always ask us. We have a whole session just on that. We have a whole number of different online webinars as well as publications about different records management topics, which we're happy to share. And one thing we want to mention here, and it's important to repeat it, is the schedule itself is media neutral. So that means it doesn't matter whether it's paper or electronic, the time period is going to be the same. So paper database doesn't matter. The amount of time it's kept, always the same. So you need to determine which is the official copy of, or the copy of record. Is it the electronic copy or the paper copy? But there are not different time periods or rules for keeping paper versus electronic. So you don't keep emails less than you would paper letter, that sort of thing for correspondence. Okay. But schedule isn't the be all end all. There are some things it does not do. The schedule does not mandate destruction. So just because the record's retention period is passed, it really doesn't mean that you have to destroy this record. It simply means this is when you can dispose of it legally because its legal minimum retention period. Now, we highly recommend that you do for reasons that become obvious. The schedule also doesn't address all your records management issues. It doesn't do, it doesn't do everything. It doesn't identify your confidential or restricted records. It can't tell you what those are. We can certainly, we can help you with that at the state archives, but really the experts are the Committee on Open Government. And if you want information on them, you just Google Committee on Open Government and they'll be able to help you out. The other issue is it doesn't mandate that you create records. It doesn't force you to create records. So if it's in the schedule, it doesn't mean you have to create it. Some people sometimes get confused with that, particularly now that it's 400 pages. But it just it simply tells you how long you need to keep it if it is created in your regular day-to-day business. It doesn't tell you how to handle things like non-record, like blank forms or publications. In some of those cases, you have to decide on your own, but there's a general retention that unofficial copies can be discarded when they're no longer needed. And it doesn't tell you how to destroy the records themselves. What processes you need to do to ensure the records are destroyed and the data is not going to be recovered in any way. And again, we have more training on that as well. So why even use a schedule in the first place? What's the point? Well, it makes sure that you're keeping records as long as needed. It helps ensure legal compliance, basically. You keep the records just as long as you need to, and then there are no legal issues for getting rid of them too early. People can't say that you're doing something incorrect or illegal. It makes sure that you're discarding records that you no longer need. At the same time, you're not keeping them longer than you need, so you're improving records retrieval. Means, you can get to your records quicker simply because you're going to save so much time and aggravation because you don't need to go through records that should have been disposed through already to try to identify something or pull something out for somebody who needs it. You're going to save money and space, and that's kind of obvious. You're not wasting money and space on records that should be, in the recycling bin or shredded by now. The schedule helps you identify your permanent records, the ones you cannot get rid of. These can be you can set up a system so they're easily identified as permanent. We usually recommend when it comes to retention period, if it's permanent, you make that in bold capital letters or in red, something like that. And you can identify those records that are permanent and then separate them if you need to, if they need to be stored in a different location, maybe under different conditions, that sort of thing. Or, if these are electronic, because electronic records can be have permanent retention as well. If they're electronic, you're going to have to do additional kind of steps to help preserve them, the migration and so on. Most of all, it's going to make your work easier. You get rid of what you already need, you save time and money, so you have less mess to deal with in the end. And really, that's what we're all looking for, is less mess and make things easier. So now we're at the part about trying to actually navigate this thing. So we're trying to figure out how we work with the schedule itself. If you're familiar with any of the other previous schedules, the basics haven't changed. First thing you need to do is identify the record series that you're working with when you're looking at a group of records. And once you identify the series, you can look up its retention. But you have to make sure that you're dealing with a single series, not a group of kind of unrelated records that have been thrown together. A good way to do this is determine, the purpose or function of the record itself. It can help identify it, what department it came from. The other thing you have to do is determine which is the official copy, because only the official copies follow the retention period. You only have to keep one official copy. You need to determine which of the records are your record copies and which are the duplicates, or the ones that are, convenience copies you can get rid of when they're no longer needed. This can be determined with a records inventory or an appraisal. Have somebody identify and look at those records for you. Duplicates, of course, can be discarded, so you're good with that. The other thing you're going to have to do as you're working through the retention schedule is check the schedule's functional headings. And what those are, when I show you a demo of the live version, you'll see the functional headings are the different departments like public safety, fiscal, different topics for the records. And those will be pretty obvious. So if you knew things previously were under fiscal, they're still going to be under fiscal for most point. All right, the other thing you can do is check the index to the schedule. So if you're working with like the PDF copy or paper copy of the LGS-1, you can check that index. You can look at the index. Sometimes you can find the specific thing you may need, and the specific page that it's on if you check the index. Otherwise, you can search keywords in the electronic version. And that's what I'm going to do a demo of, is the electronic version. And we'll show that probably in the next slide or two, and you get an idea. But that you can just type in your keywords and find what you're looking for. So if you're looking for checks, you just type in checks, so on. If you're still having no luck figuring out, what is the record that I'm dealing with? Where does it fit in the schedule? You contact us at the State Archives. You can contact myself. I'll put my contact information at the end, or you can contact the scheduling unit, because if I don't have the answer, I'm going to go to them anyway. So you can contact the scheduling unit as well, and usually we are able to find an answer. If we don't, that means something's got to be changed, something's got to be updated. And really, the LGS-1 came about because there were so many changes, there were so many things that needed to be updated. So people have been pointing things out for years that weren't included. We made sure to include them over the years, and now we made sure we've got the LGS-1 that includes everything. Now, if it's still not addressed, it means that we have to make additional updates. So let us know if something is not included, and then if not, we will do our best to make sure it's included in whatever the next update will be for the LGS-1. I guess in theory, that would be the LGS-2. All right, so now we're going to try the demo, and I have to stop sharing this screen and try this. No, everything crashed. Okay, let's try sharing the other screen. Here we go. Okay, so I believe you're going to get a link directly to the schedule, but if you go to our website, you can see archives.nisa.gov. You can see the managing record section and the retention and disposition schedules in the menu. Don't want to deal with the state agency retention and disposition schedules because you're local government, so you don't have to deal with that. So you go to the local government and retention disposition schedules, and you can see right there, we got a brand spanking new local government schedule. So we click on the LGS-1, and here's our online version. And what this does is it gives you a number of different formats we actually have it as. So the web resource, that's what we're currently using, the online. Also a link for a PDF copy of 411 pages, how to ask for a print copy. We still have some available. We had, I think, a couple thousand printed, and I think we still have some available, so you can always request those. But it will take some time to get it, usually about 2 to 3 weeks right now. We also have some additional things that we created, like some Excel worksheets, as well as I believe there's the local government retention schedule database as well. So MS Access database as well as a Excel spreadsheet. So that's nice to have as well. So if you're working with any kind of large system, you can integrate the new schedule within it. But really what we're here for is that old keyword search. So you search the schedule and you can see we can put in things like checks. When you put that in and apply, you get a number of different things start coming up. So under fiscal, we see cancel check, stop payment notices. And if we click on that, we'll get additional information, and that includes, the description, and you can see the retention as well as any notes. You'll also notice, see this little black dot here? That is something new for the LGS-1 to let you know that this is either a new item or there's been a major revision, as in the retention period has changed or didn't even exist before. There's the schedule item that's listed for the new schedule for 476 and what it was previously under the county CO2, municipality MU1, and so forth. So let's say you really knew the previous schedule well, and you knew that 440 in the ED1 was something that you use often. Well, if you put in 440 under search, it's not only going to pull up 440 for the current schedule, but as you can see, it's going to pull up for the previous schedules as well. So we've cross-referenced them. So you can find eventually ED1 440 as well. So we think that's actually pretty handy for people who understand how to use the previous schedules, so they'll be able to easily move on to and take that information and work with the LGS-1. We also have some crosswalk spreadsheets as well that can help you move the information back and forth if you have it in a spreadsheet or something else for previously. Remember how I mentioned those subject headings and topics? Here we go here. There's general administration and so on. And you can see all those black diamonds mean it's been an update of some way, shape, or form. So again, just any old topic you can think of. Let's say zoning permits. And we apply, and boom, we get what we're looking for. Planning, zoning, building, property regulation. The thing you have to be careful of is if you just put in something like permits, you're going to get everything associated. So as you can see, you're getting things under project review, building, zoning, sure. but you're also going to get community colleges, environmental health permits, the whole 9 yards. So you want to make sure to kind of narrow down what you're looking for when you're doing a search. Okay, so that's the basic version of the online one. And again, we think it's much easier to work with in terms of searching. That is for sure. All right, let's close that and see if we can. Oh, it closes me off when I do that. Of course it does. Okay, so let's try this again. Okay, so that was a little demonstration of our online version. Like I said, it's much easier to work with in terms of searching rather than that 400-page, paper copy that you're going back and forth, or, it's in that big old binder and you can use it for a doorstop. Okay, so now just a quick talk about some office retention schedules, what exactly these are. Well, they're kind of a version of the retention schedule, but they're very specific. They're basically a cheat sheet for your office. So you and your staff only have what you need. You don't need those 400 plus pages. It will allow longer retentions, but you have to find a reason to keep things longer. If you find a reason, this is a good place to note it down. It will allow you to identify records by a common name. Here's the thing. We're bureaucrats, so we don't always speak English. The schedules are based on laws and statutes, so it's not always natural language. For example, there's nothing for receipt. They're called vouchers here. So, but in an office retention schedule, you can call it whatever you want. You can give it any name that you're familiar with. A TR4 or whatever, you can say whatever it may be, and people be familiar with that rather than the legalese some of this might be. Okay, you want to make sure, it's going to indicate the retention within these schedules. It's going to really stick out. So people will know where they can find the information and how long they need to keep it. This way, they're not going to be able to miss it. This is going to help you implement a general records retention because people will know when they can get rid of things, when they can go from active to inactive storage or what have you. The other way it's really kind of helpful is it serves as a really good list for records for FOIL. You need to have, for FOIL law, you need to have a subject list. If you do this as part of your office schedule, you'll have it on hand right then and there. So that's incredibly helpful. Some different parts of office retention schedules, can be a number of different elements as part of your retention schedule. You can include things like the department, the record series title. You can tell if it's, active or inactive. You can also, this is a good place to indicate what's your official copy. Is it your electronic copy or your paper copy? Make that very clear right in your schedule. It's going to encourage, basically disposition of the records. It's going to encourage people to get rid of them because whether they're paper or electronic, people know when they can get rid of things legally. They don't have to question, well, should we keep this or should we not? They'll know exactly. And the way you do that is make sure people in your office have their own copy of the schedule so they each understand how to use it. And then the other thing we recommend is including it in your basic staff orientation. Because if you get people familiar with it from the beginning, when they first get there, then they're not going to be confused about where to go. They're going to have a basic idea of where they need to look for information on records management right in the schedule. Okay. Now, the LGS-1 overview. What exactly is this thing? Well, we've been talking about it. It's really been a long-term process to consolidate the 4 different local government schedules into one single schedule. Our joke is one to rule them all. This is the one, this is the be all end all in terms of retention schedules. Really, our unit in Albany, people have been working on this for years. These decisions were not made quickly. A lot of time was taken, of course, to review and make sure that it actually makes sense. The retention unit went over the schedules, all the different schedules that we had. They saw where things were duplicated, out of date, and in some cases, like technology, things were painfully out of date. I'll give you an example in a minute. And, you know, this new creation is called the LGS-1, and that's exactly what you think it stands for, Local Government Schedule 1. We're not exactly, incredibly creative. LGS-1. The first thing you'll notice when you look at the schedule is that the item numbers are different. They're different than whatever the previous schedule was. Obviously the numbering didn't match up for all the schedules. And of course, as we made additions, the numbers are not going to match up as they need to. So as I was able to show, it doesn't mean that the old schedule items were lost. Again, if you know what 220 in CO2 is, you are going to be able to find it in the new schedule because there are cross references throughout for any item that you notice. Okay. Some additional info on the LGS-1. One thing's really nice, we retain the same section headings. We eliminated, some things like miscellaneous. We got rid of that and renamed it general and renamed the general to a general administration, but otherwise things staying the same. So if you know what's in the physical section or law enforcement, that's not going to change. We did flag those major revisions and new items. As I mentioned, those are the little black diamonds. So whether you're looking at the online version or the paper, if you see a black diamond, you know something has changed. The other thing that's really important, and we've been talking about this since March of 2020, all the previous existing schedules, so your CO2, your ED1, your MI1, and your MU1, they all expired on January 1st, 2021. So you can't use those anymore. You have to use the LGS-1 if you want to dispose of your records legally. And you have to, as part of following the LGS-1, you need to adopt it. You have to make sure that you're adopting, you have to make sure that the schedule is adopted, and then you can legally follow it. And the way you can ensure that you are that you've adopted it is we have a model resolution that we'll be happy to share as well, and you can contact me for that. But that's available right on our website. So if you're not sure exactly, what language you need or whatever to have your board or your council adopt it, we have just a plug and play thing, name of town, name of city, village, what have you, right then and there. But once you adopt it, then you can follow, you'll be officially following the schedule, and then you can get rid of things. If you are not following the schedule at the LGS-1, as of January 1st, you cannot legally get rid or dispose any of your records. And that's why we've been, haranguing about this for the last year or so. So if you're not familiar with it, again, please contact me. Happy to give you more information about that, so you know exactly what you need to do to make sure you've adopted the schedule. Okay, so here are the changes that really affect everyone before we start, breaking down for this is who dealing with one thing and whatnot. These are ones that affect everybody. So we put those first. So we've consolidated the different various executive items into a single item. So anything that would count as the executive, be it a town supervisor, a mayor, superintendent, administrator, county sheriff, police chiefs, whatever, doesn't matter. This is all under executive, and the retention period was the same. So we'll use this basic umbrella title of executive to cover all of these. We renamed the electronic data processing section. And really, this is a good example of how behind the times with technology we were. I can't tell you how many references there were to things like computer disks, and not CDs, but computer disks like floppies, that sort of thing. IT, information technology. We've renamed it the information technology section because that's how people describe these records. That's how people describe the department. It's IT. It's not electronic data processing. It just sounds so painful and clunky. It also made it, this name consistent with other items in like the general schedule, that sort of thing, for the state general schedule. The other thing we did is reduce the retention period for backup tape and expanded to include other incremental backup periods, meaning you don't have to keep all these backups too long and they can be superseded by new ones. We also added a new item to cover security breach notifications and reduce retention for computer system security records because they didn't really exist before, at least not according to the schedule. And we updated the retention periods for Medicare and Medicaid claims. Uh, for those specific items, we increased those to 10 years, and that's based on a state False Claims Act, part of the state finance law, and that allows a state agency to bring a civil action to recover financial losses from a financial claim. So basically, we did that to make sure that it was consistent with the law. Same thing is true about child abuse reports. We updated those to age 55 based on the Child Victims Act. And we also included a also talk about that in the public safety section, which has a duplicate item for those. We made the attorney counsel section consistent. There was some confusion about what's an attorney, what's counsel, that sort of thing. We made that consistent. Added clarifying notes regarding videos and audio recording evidence, that sort of thing. We made sure that all of this wasn't confusing. We tried to make it very clear. Some changes, that everybody has to deal with. There are some new meeting items in the administrative section. This is specific to meeting records, so it's added new items to cover meetings that are not subject to the open meetings law. This includes things like internal meeting records and external group meeting files, that sort of thing. We also added a sub item to meeting files to clarify and reduce the retention of meeting notes, so you don't have to keep them forever. Also, some changes for employee benefits. We updated those. It used to just say health and life insurance. We brought that to say, expanded that to say employee benefit records. So everything would be included, like health insurance payout programs, FMLA stuff, COBRA compliance, that sort of thing. We added some emergency and disaster items, some under civil defense, things like FEMA grants, emergency distribution records, test evacuation or mock disaster response. We also updated the public health section, and we did this apparently just in time because we added items like public health incident records. And this was planned years before COVID, but it's become incredibly important since then. So any kind of your records related to public health emergencies, communicable diseases, or epidemics, that's where it falls under. And we dealt with that issue before we knew it was going to be a problem. We're glad that we addressed that. Some additional changes that everybody has to deal with. We added some physical items to cover electronic checks. Electronic checks has been the most requested item by local governments to ask them to destroy it, because basically they say, okay, once we've scanned this check and we have a copy of it, do we need to keep the paper anymore? And the answer is no. We have, there's a new item, it's number 477. It says original check, money order, or similar instrument of payment 60 days after deposit or verification of account information, and it's no longer needed for something like an audit or what have you. So people are incredibly happy about that. Local governments were asking for that for a number of years. Also had information for reporting for OPEB, or other than pension, post employment benefits. So post-retirement life and health insurance, vision, dental, that sort of thing. Didn't have anything to cover that previously. Also revised the workers' compensation section to decrease the retention period for some cases. So you only need to keep information about the payment rather than the entire case file, for example. That sort of thing. which is very nice. Again, we're trying to make sure that people are only keeping the things that they need to, and we're taking your feedback as to, well, we really haven't used these because nobody ever requests them, and legally, do we need to keep them? In some cases, we find out the answer is no, you don't. Okay, so now we're going to try a poll here. And now the question we're going to ask is, how many years have people been working with records? 1 to 2, you're still pretty new. 2 to 5, maybe been through an election or two. 5 to 10, you know your way pretty good. 10 to 20, you got things down. Or 20 plus, you've been doing it for so long you can teach somebody else. All right, it looks like most people about 5 to 10. So you would be familiar with the previous schedules. So this is something new. We do have some people that are pretty new as well. So it looks like we got a decent mix. All right, good. Excellent. Yeah, it just helps me get an idea of where everybody is. Of course, that pops back. All right, so now we can talk about some changes that are specific to school districts and BOCES. Maybe if technology likes me. Okay, so under the administration section in what used to be the old ED1, now it's just under LGS-1, under the school districts and BOCES section. There's subsections and one is administration. You'll see we've added new items for new things that now exist, like the student race and ethnicity. And we've updated ethnicity update questionnaires. We made sure to include items for records that are being created, records that didn't exist prior to the last time things were done. In some cases, go back to about 2003, so it's definitely been a while. We updated new items to include things for commencement records and the alumni directory. In case you're wondering, the alumni directory is permanent. I did not realize that either, but it is true. We revised the residency determination records to, more accurately reflect how schools file records and their retention period. So we making sure you don't actually have to keep them longer than needed. So, basically a year after the final determination or the student's no longer enrolled in the district. We expanded appeals to the Commissioner of Education item to include information about the annual professional performance reviews. It wasn't included previously, now it is. Things like that. For the school section, for health, we added a sub-item to cover physician authorizations to resume athletic activity after a traumatic brain injury. And those records are permanent. So again, another example of what level of detail we're going down to try to make sure things are updated and you're getting what you need within the schedule. So you don't have to ask us, hey, what exactly do I do with this? Because I don't know what it is. When it comes to instructions, we added new items to cover unused Regents exams. People, these were piling up over the years. How long do they need to keep them? Well, we told them finally 1 year after the end of school year. That's good, unless they have, long-term historical value because they're really, really old or something else. Increased retention period for testing papers from 1 to 2 years. And that was based on a recommendation from the state education department themselves. They had a specific request for that as well. So we're getting feedback from everybody and working with that. For school safety, we added a section note indicating items, removed to other sections. So if you can't find it in, something about building security, that's been moved to public property and equipment. And you'll see within the schedule itself, there are notes indicating that. We updated the title and description of safety and emergency response plans. It didn't include information about building wide and building level plans. We made sure that that is very specific because what people require at this time. It's not enough to, just cover the school. It does include all the facilities as well. And we updated the school violence and dangerous school records item. It includes now the DASA records or the Dignity for All Student Acts. All of that is included now. Again, as things are changing, we're trying to update and make sure that we're changing with them. Here is a big one. For special education, we removed the reference to health records. For a long period of time, the health records of special education students were being maintained or, kept in the same folder as their special education records, not within the student health records as it should be. And we made sure that these health records should be filed with the students' health records in the health subsection, not within their special education folder. It's causing a lot of confusion. Now, when we actually get to student records themselves, there's a lot of things we added. We added a section regarding ELA and math assessment, clarified, what to do with records covering non-district students. We added references to homeschooling in this case, because non-district students is basically, in some cases can be homeschooling. So that didn't really, it wasn't incredibly popular in 2003 like it is now. So we made sure to include references to that. We added a new item for emergency contact record, parental consent and release forms, and we eliminated the student's attendance exemption record. So we're adding some things and getting rid of things as well, because they're just not used anymore. If you're talking about student records, the specific item itself, like what goes in that folder, people always ask what's going in that folder. Well, we added a note clarifying students covered under this item for filing of transgender names. That's become an issue, so we make sure that we've included that as well. We've added things like the skills and achievement credential and CDOS or career development and occupational studies. All of those kind of things we've added as well. The home language questionnaire, English language proficiency, all of those results. Clarifying any kind of cover student records and instances where the district does not operate a post-elementary school. So we get in these kind of situations where people are not exactly sure what happens with these records. We help clarify that within the schedule itself. What do you do with things like unclaimed diplomas? Who would ever think of that? Well, we did, and we have a retention for it. It's 1 year, by the way. If nobody picks it up, it's gone after a year, so don't leave it behind. And things like proof of residency records for a student, how long you need to keep those, have they been superseded, that sort of thing. Again, incredibly high level of detail that we're trying to include information, because that's what people have been asking us. Teacher resource and computer training center. We updated these retention periods, to reflect the SED requirement that these sponsors' records need to be retained for at least 8 years. So we made sure instead of 6 years or a year that these are being maintained for at least 8 years. Any kind of transportation for school, we had a sub item to cover records related to school bus drivers who are not BOCES employees. Another item to cover school bus photo violation monitoring system records. If somebody's going through a red light or doing something that they shouldn't, it's going to be captured on that camera. Well, how long do you keep those records? That sort of thing. You now know the answer to. Retain as long as there's a case investigation. If it doesn't relate to a specific investigation, gone after 6 months. So we're trying to cover everything. Talk about some changes for counties. Start off with the county clerk section. Well, we moved some items to the general administration section. Your chattel mortgages, your census records, any kind of notary public records, those are all going to be in the general administration section. They previously were in the county clerk section. We also revised the assignment of mortgages. Previously, they could be destroyed. Now they are permanent. So the revised item will, it's going to specify that assignments of mortgages require permanent retention. Community colleges. We updated a number of things for campus safety, different document types from the U.S. Department of Education, their handbook for campus safety, added an item, requirements brought about by changes to Campus Security Act regarding missing persons and their procedures, evacuation, fire safety, that sort of thing. have a new item now that covers class assignments, homework and the like. Those are included as well. We increase the retention for some applicants. Applicants who apply and are not accepted was actually increased from 2 years to 3. And we clarify the retention period for student information as well. What exactly, for basic student information and financial aid data, we all make that very clear within the schedule of how long you need to keep that. Mentioned the executive section, we folded all those into one, so it doesn't matter what you call it, it's all the same thing. The other thing is we added the calendar to an executive office files. So that wasn't included before, now it is. Those should be maintained as well. And public administrator is, it doesn't happen that often. Public administrator is responsible for handling the estates of decedents who have no relatives or executors. We have those in some counties. I don't believe yours is, Jefferson, Lewis, Oneida, Herkimer, we're not dealing with those, but, usually that kind of thing is covered by the chief fiscal officer. In this case would be the county treasurer. But we made that clear what exactly those roles are. Again, people were confused, wanted to make things clear. That's why we're doing these things. For public health, well, we had a number of changes. We lengthened the prescription drugs retention that are subject to Medicaid. That requires a minimum retention period of 10 years because of the Medicaid law, so we make sure that we increase that. We reduced the retention for some mental health files. In this case, case records from 10 years after discharge to last contact to 6 years after date of last service in this case. We added items for screening results, your lead poisoning and other screening results, any kind of negative results of a screening. Obviously, with COVID, this has become a very, very important thing in terms of screening results for records. And that's actually the item we use for many of the COVID screenings and tests. Public health incident files. We added a new item to make sure that that's included. Again, that's your public health emergency, epidemics, and so on. Added something for Laverne's Law. That was passed in 2018. It extends the statute of limitations for a patient who has to file for a medical malpractice suit for a missed cancer diagnosis. So we made sure that you're keeping the records long enough to match with the law. Same with HIPAA, which we're familiar with, and HITECH, which is the Health and Information Technology for Economic and Clinical Health Act. HITECH, we're making sure that we are covering all your health records as well according to the laws. And the OMH emergency admission forms. Nothing existed for those before. Now something does. We'll tell you exactly how long you need to keep those. For emergency admissions for immediate observation, that may be required by the Office of Mental Health. Public safety, a number of different inclusions here. We're talking about, body worn cameras, red light cameras, license plate readers, those kind of things. We added items to make sure that these are now covered, how long you need to keep them and when you can get rid of them. Another thing is we made the life expectancy retention 90 years. We had a couple different years, a couple different examples sometimes for life retention. Some were 75, some were 80, some were 90. We made them all the same. It's all 90 years. We updated the retention for the Child Victims Acts. We updated the child abuse claims and limitations on those crimes to age 28 in criminal cases and 55 in civil cases. So you need to keep those records for additional time period to coincide with the law. We also revised the pistol permit for the SAFE Act. So this includes information about recertification, reference to pistol permits, and so on. More items for public safety, because a lot of things changed over the last 20 years or so in public safety. We added items for criminal background checks, community outreach programs, any kind of time confidential information is received. So your hotlines or your tip lines, how long you need to keep that information. And DMV photo requests. This is when people are requesting it for legitimate business reasons, usually another government agency. Civil service and personnel. Mentioned, renamed the health and life insurance part. We increased the retention periods for a number of different things. Health and life insurance to 6 years. Employment and affirmative action to 4 years. Driver's license review. Those were actually increased to 5 years from 3. We also make sure we're covering the annual professional performance review. Those records are included as well. They weren't previously. Had to add a whole bunch of items for the Family Medical Leave Act, COBRA, any kind of employment verification requests from other employees or former employees or other businesses. Employee ethics records, make sure that those are covered. Workplace violence prevention programs didn't exist large enough for us to address them. Now they do, and they are addressed within the new schedule. Social services, at least on a county level, had some major changes. We actually created 2 separate sections, one to account for social services on county level, and then social services other than county. So all those different functions. We also added some items to cover welfare fraud complaints and youth and nursing facilities. Again, you can see we're covering a lot of different areas. More social services. We increased the retention for Medicare and Medicaid, of course, that 10 years for the False Claims Act. Worked with the Office of Children and Family Services to clarify retention for a number of different things. The previous retentions were based on events, and sometimes those events, and the years and the events weren't exactly lining up with how reality is versus what we thought it was. So now we're making sure that things are actually much more correct in terms of years and how long we need to keep things. We also updated the domestic violence residential program, which is 6 years following termination of the program itself rather than permanently. Taxation and assessment. Yes, we added a sub-item to cover your pilot records. That's payment in lieu of taxes. Wasn't covered before, now it is. We clarified the whole idea of what's an assessment and tax rolls and everything else, and how long do you keep the non-warrant copies of tax rolls if you're a city and a county and so on. We made that clear within the schedule itself. Particularly copies of tentative and final assessment rolls. We added something to make sure that those are covered as well. And again, if you ever have any questions, you can always ask, because tax rolls can be confusing. I know that. Okay, one more question here before we start with users of the old MI1. When you first started, was there somebody with experience you could ask questions, or were you pretty much on your own? I'm always curious about that one. Yeah, it's nice when you can have somebody you can ask, but most people are pretty much thrown into it on their own. That's your typical response. Okay, so it looks like most people were on your own. So you probably were contacting your RAO to find out what was going on as quickly as you could, or find out who your RAO was. Okay, so now I can talk about changes that are going to affect users of those miscellaneous governments, the fire districts, library systems, conservation districts. So talk about local development and public benefit corporations. There's an item for the IDAs, or those industrial development agencies. A note was added to make sure that the voice recordings regarding the general municipals law, that those agencies must post the recordings on their website for at least 5 years. So IDAs must have their recordings on their website for 5 years. Didn't know that? Now it's there. Very clear. Also, there's in the public property and equipment section, there's an annual environmental audit that was required by DEC, and we tell you how long you need to keep that as well. We're talking about libraries and library systems. We have some items regarding the E-rate program for schools and libraries. We even added things like library card applications, interlibrary loan records, program and exhibit files, things like, if you're enrolling for a program or you need parental consent because, for this particular program, we're going to go outside in the dark and catch fireflies. You need to make sure that you have that parental consent. That's great. How long do you need to keep those forms? You need to keep them 20, 30 years? No, you don't. And we make sure that it's very clear how long you need to keep them. And it's really nice because a similar item actually exists in the museum section covering the program and exhibits as well. So if you're working with either one of those, it's going to be the same. Soil and water conservation districts. Well, not a lot has changed, thankfully. There are two similar items in the MI1 and the CO2 that were combined to make a new item within the general administration section. So we kind of moved some things. So it's really not a major change, but if you're looking for the item that covers the records that were created in the establishment, change, or dissolution, of a county agricultural district, that's now in item 43 in the general section and has a permanent retention. That hasn't changed. So it's still there, still permanent, just in a different section. And we have a note saying, don't look here, look over here. Talking about transportation and engineering for these kind for these miscellaneous governments. In this case, we're talking about, your airports, transportation authorities, that sort of thing. We have some sub items regarding the security plan and airport registration for airports in the area. Also, we expanded the old item for parking records to include all the parking records, not just the handicapped or disabled parking permit records. So everything has been included under the parking permit. The other handicapped disabled ones were not separated out anymore. Some more information about public property and equipment. Now, this may relate to your transportation authorities as well. Documentation about underground piping. We included items talking about, petroleum bulk storage records. Is this piping been removed? How was it removed? Was the storage tank removed? That sort of thing. Other things on lead abatement. This is particular to building rehabilitation and reconstruction. What was the lead abatement project files? We've included information on that. Mention those DEC annual audit reports. How about your facility health and safety inspections? We included specific items for those. And superseded property inventories. We changed the retention period. It was increased because originally it was just 0 after superseded to now it's 6 years after superseded. So make sure that it stays around a little bit longer because people saw the need for it. How about your cooperative extensions? Well, not too many changes, thankfully. Here we're talking about, the descriptions of some of the programs like Expanded Food and Nutritional Education Program, or FNEP, is now changed to SNAP, the Supplemental Nutrition and Assistance Program, that sort of thing. So we changed those names, and we included an item for 4-H membership records. Yep, those are included too. Those happen to have 6 years after participation ends or 3 years after the individual attains the age of 18, whichever is longer. So now you know how long you need to keep those 4-H records. This is specific to, if a municipality is running their own electric and gas utility. We added a note that explains that. The section covers just those one that generate its own power. We added items to include things like a ledger or a journal item. Make sure that that's kept for 50 years. What about the resident application to connect to the system? How long you need to keep those? 6 years after connection. How about the cash books, keeping track of all the cash transactions? Uh, and any kind of life or mortality study data that is done in terms of, is this utility causing any issues, circle clusters and whatnot for reasons, for any kind of problems, health issues. That retention is permanent. Aha, changes for municipalities. Now we talked about all the different kinds, and most of those also affect towns and villages. The ones I'm going to talk about now, and there's just a few because everything else has kind of been covered, but these have not been covered by anything else. These specifically affect towns, villages, cities, your municipalities. Here's one that has been going on for a number of years. We clarified the vital records retention. These are Department of Health records, and they're maintained by the local government, but they're not owned by the local government. So we explain why you're not going to find anything in the LGS-1 local government schedule about these vital records, your birth, death, marriage records. So they're maintained by local governments, but they're actually the property of the New York State Department of Health. That's why they're not in the LGS-1. Have questions about that all the time. We added some items to talk about housing to cover things like monthly and inspection reports, items to cover housing inspection records, minor building issues, that sort of thing. Here's another one, clarify the dog identification and control items. This is something that has been going on for almost 10 years, or no, just about 10 years now. We had previously references to Department of Agriculture and Markets. New York State Department of Agriculture and Markets hasn't been dealing with dog tags or licenses or anything like that since then. So municipalities have been authorized to issue their own dog licenses and assume all the dog's licensing functions. We made that very clear and explicit. That has caused some confusion in the past as well. Here's something else that, been in the news lately. Added sub-items for election registration challenge records to cover things like your unused, your spoiled, voided, or rejected ballots. In this case, it's 2 years after receipt of final decision, unless, or whichever is later, unless of course it is still being contested. Because it may last for years, we don't know. Some other changes specific to municipal entities. We reduced the retention for solid waste and public water facility operation reports. So for public waste, it went from 10 years to 7. And for water facility, it went from 5 to 3. Try to make it a little bit easier so you don't have to keep these forever. Another thing, this police blotter thing. People were confused exactly what a police blotter consisted of, particularly in this day and age. Where exactly does it fall under the public safety section? What is it legally? We made this very clear that, the blotter itself is not a legally defined item. It has different interpretations. So we reworded it to remove references to the blotter and allow copies of records or data submitted to the Department of Criminal Justice Services to have less than a permanent retention status. Because we were telling everybody the police blotter has to be kept forever. Well, then what about these other records that are being sent to DCJS? Don't need to keep those forever because DCJS is keeping them. We updated the length of service award program items for firefighters. Seems like a good idea. And we also included volunteer ambulance workers, which is a nice thing as well. We reduced the retention for 2nd, 3rd, and 4th degree arson and those routine fire investigations. Routine fire investigations, you only need to keep a year, which is very nice. Again, we're trying to make it so you can get rid of your records. And we added a sub-item to capital transportation improvement files. This thing, we're talking about the DOT grants, like CHIPS and your other programs. And now just a few quick thoughts. about retention in general, might answer some common questions as well for electronic records, longer retention, and documenting disposition. Okay, when it talks about managing your e-records retention, already talked about it didn't matter whether it's paper or electronic, it doesn't matter. The other thing you have to remember is if you are dealing with a large ECMS or some kind of large system, you need to think about disposition within the system itself. So if you're looking at an ECMS, you have to think about, yes, you want to maintain these records, but can you purge them when the time comes for disposition as well? So you want to address the retention in any kind of system design or with your vendor. Want to include that information as well, because people don't always think about that when they're talking about electronic records. And then, of course, manage those records centrally as much as possible. In this case, what we're talking about is you don't want to create additional digital silos. We know that they exist. You don't have to necessarily create new ones, but you want to make sure that your ECMS or any kind of network that you're working with can work with all your different software packages. They can each work with each other and all the different systems that you have. Can you keep records longer? Of course you can keep records longer. People ask us this all the time. If you choose to do it, you can keep them longer, but we recommend that you are very selective. Don't keep things just because it's easy to do. Now in this day and age of everything's, digital, electronic, you can store things in the cloud for forever and a day. But eventually you will run out of space, or you'll run out of the money that you have for that space, because one or the other is going to become an issue sooner or later. So be selective in terms of records. If somebody tells you, oh, don't worry, you can keep everything, don't worry about it, you can keep it forever. Like if they're working with an electronic system, don't worry about taking stuff out, you can just keep it in there. Look into possibly getting rid of that. You don't want to keep things forever, because then you can run into legal issues. We say, when in doubt, throw it out. Once it's met, it's legal retention, of course. And here's one more point I think is really crucial to add. You want to document your disposition, maintain a record of what is being destroyed. It's really vital to keep track of the records that it's disposed of legally. If you do not, then you're going to enter into that gray area that something you've done can be called into question, and you never want to do that. Legally, you're protecting yourself from any claims, of misuse or abuse by documenting who authorized destruction and who witnessed it. We have examples of those forms. If you need a copy, I'll be happy to share it. This kind of thing is going to prove you disposed of your records legally. And that's what you want to do at all times, is confirm everything is being done legally and above board without question, all of your procedures. So wrapping up, just want to remind you of some basic things. Redoing and consolidating all these different schedules is really a good thing. You have a schedule that's truly updated, and it's going to address recent laws, regulations, covers things that didn't even exist or, were lost in the cracks for any previous ones. The LGS-1 really gives you a full array of all the different retention items that were in the different schedules. So no matter where they were before, they're all going to be in the same one. And this is a good opportunity to look at your records management program overall as you're starting to adopt the new schedule. Try to look where things may have been out of date. Maybe you were maintaining things really good for a few years and it kind of fell by the wayside, or, in some cases over the last year, people have really been able to focus on retention because not as many people were coming in, or nobody was allowed to come in, or maybe people are at home and they couldn't do anything. Figure out what exactly has been going on with your records management program. This is a good time to take stock and find out what's going on when you have to make this kind of change. Other thing is, remember, you're not alone in this. If you're really feeling kind of overwhelmed by the information that we're throwing at you right now, remember, people like myself, we're here to help explain and guide you through this process. But so are your neighbors. Everyone's kind of going through the same thing right now, because everybody has to adopt this. Everybody has to work through this. So you can reach out to them as well to help answer some of your questions, share information, that sort of thing. other thing to remember is this isn't going to happen overnight. It's not an overnight solution. Implementing this schedule update is going to be, it's going to take some time. It's important because you want to be compliant. You want to be able to get rid of records legally, so you have to follow this. But it's going to take some time depending on where you are right now in terms of your schedule and what you're doing currently with your records. And all in all, there's going to be challenges, there's going to be issues, but that's what I'm here for, to answer some of those questions and help you when you run into things that you can't deal with. That's what I'm here for after all. And with that, here's my contact information. You can email me or, call my cell phone. It's always at the ready. I'm actually very thankful it didn't ring in the last hour or so. So now is the chance, if you have questions, to add, I'll do my best to answer any questions that you may have. I always say I may not have the answer, but I know where I can find it, and I don't have to continue sharing this if you have that contact information.
Michael, we do have a question on where
Sure.
they can find the model resolution of adopting the LGS-1.
Sure, I'll add it to the chat.
Okay, great. Thank you.
Yep. I'll make sure I include that, but it's on our website. And let me see. Of course, it was easy to find 5 seconds ago, but now I can't find it. I know we're actually in the process right now of redoing our managing records section. So right now it's not always easy to find everything you want to find immediately. There we go. List of major revisions. Here we go. That's what you want to write? Or
I don't think it's been, I don't think it didn't show up in my chat yet.
Okay, but you want for the revisions?
It says model resolution of adopting.
Oh, okay, sorry, wrong one. Yep, I got that too. Model resolution. There we go. Thank God it's all on our website. There's the model resolution.
Thank you.
Mm-hmm.
And then somebody's asking, is there a link to the forms?
The disposition form, it's in our publication 41, and I can put a link to that as well. Or if you give me your email, I can just send you a PDF or Word copy of the form, whichever you would prefer for that individual. But if not, it would be in publication 41, which would be here. And that's our publication on retention and disposition. Because of course we have publication on everything. Okay, so it's part of the appendix for that publication. But again, we have it as a separate Word doc or PDF, and I can send that via email as well. I know I threw a lot of information. There's a lot of changes, and like I said, those were the highlights from the 16 pages. But if anybody wants to check out all those 16 pages, you're more than welcome to.
Did anybody have any other questions? Not seeing any more come up in the chat at the moment.
Okay.
Yes, thank you, Michael, very much for presenting today. There's a
Thank
lot
you
of
for
great
having me.
Information, and we will have that link loaded up on our website as soon as the recording comes back to us from the cloud.
Okay. Here, I can add my contact information into your chat as well. If that's all right.
Yes.
So everybody can have that. That's my email and my cell. It's right there. So if anybody needs to get in touch with me, that's the best way. Even though I'm working at my kitchen table, cell phone's still next to me. I haven't been to my office in quite some time, actually, but that's okay.
Okay. Thank you.
All right. Thank you very much. Thanks for having me, and happy to help anyone.
Okay. Thank you. Have a good day. Have
You
a good
too.
evening, everyone.
Bye-bye.